U.S.-Venezuela relations. We're absolutely delighted that the ambassador of Venezuela, Bernardo Alvarez Herrera, is with us, good enough to share his time. All of you know that we share much with Venezuela. We have a history of experiments in democracy stretching over the last couple of centuries from origins that are fairly close in time. We certainly have shared economic interests. We continue to have a major trade policy between us. And of course, in international affairs, we have shared traditionally many of the same values. Today's rhetoric sometimes belies that tradition, it would seem, but that makes the issues of the moment extraordinarily interesting. All the more reason to be delighted that the ambassador is with us. The ambassador is both a scholar and a statesman. He's been a member of the faculty of the Central University of Venezuela for over a quarter of a century in the School of Political and Administrative Studies. He is a graduate. His political science degree is from that institution. He has a Master of Arts degree from Sussex University in England in developmental studies. His early career in the government dealt extensively with matters of trade, of debt, and development. And interestingly, he also spent time on the question of government reforms. He served in the legislature as a member of as a deputy to their Congress from 94 to 99. He was the vice chairman of the National Defense Committee, and he was chairman of the Committee on Energy and Mines. And after that period served in the government as Director General for Hydrocarbons in the Ministry of Energy and then served a little after that as Vice Minister for Hydrocarbons in the Ministry of Energy and Mines. During those periods of service, he was the head of the delegation of Venezuela to OPEC's Conference of Ministers. He served as the coordinator of the U.S. Department of Energy's agreements with again, the Ministry of Energy and Mines, and in a similar position on the French Venezuelan Task Force on Energy. He's had a very distinguished career. It's an interesting one, combining scholarship on a number of interesting topics with practical work in government. And now, to our pleasure, he's the ambassador to our country. It's my great pleasure to present to you the ambassador of Venezuela, Ambassador Alvarez.
Thank you and good night. I was not expecting such a crowd, but thank you very much for being here. And it was a bit rainy coming here, but we are delighted to be here. I have been accompanied by the Minister Council for Economic Affairs of the Embassy, Mr. Jose Soho. Jose. In case you need more accurate economic answers. Okay, I would like to go through certain points of our relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela. And let me start telling you a story. You know, we ambassadors, we have to work very closely with Congress. And I've been working a lot lately just trying to reach as many members of Congress as possible. And usually when I go there and I tell them that Venezuela is the third trading partner of the U.S. after Mexico and Brazil, that Venezuela supplies is the fifth largest supplier of hydrocarbons to this country, and we are the second suppliers of products to the U.S. And you know how important it is to have products, because we have all these refining problems. And that Venezuela owns Citgo Petroleum Corporation, and that Venezuela has 65 players in the U.S. major leagues, including, by the way, our very close friends, Melvin Mora from the Orioles, and this year, happily for us, Mr. Ozzie Guillen, who is the manager of the White Sox. When I tell that to members of Congress, they say, "Are you talking about the same Venezuela?" And so this is incredible, because on the one hand, we are so close, and on the other hand, we have to recognize that we have important differences. So, but it has been very encouraging for me, looking at, you know, the complexities of the relationship. The other thing that I usually tell people is that normally ambassadors to the White House are distinguished members of the diplomatic corps. And when I am in meetings, for example, with my dearest friend, the ambassador of Mexico, for example, and the ambassador from Brazil, they know each other's because they were posted as ambassadors. Their first ambassadorial job they had 25 years ago in Ecuador. And I always feel a bit strange that 7 years ago I was a member of a small party in the parliament in Venezuela, and well, 7 years after that I'm the ambassador to the US. To tell you and this is a way of trying to explain people the process of changes that we have been having in Venezuela over the last 6 or 7 years. And we also understand that people might get confused of what is going on, because, you know, people are not ready for changes, and people prefer, you know, to have, and this is something which is very important, because in Venezuela there is an ongoing process of radical social, political, economic, cultural transformation, and you have, if you want to understand what is happening, you have to understand that process of change. But again, I would try to tell you some ideas about democracy, the economy, social programs, the new vision that we have of regional integration in the hemisphere, and of course some ideas about the U.S. and Venezuelan relationship. Regarding the democracy, what is the state of Venezuelan democracy under President Chavez? A topic long misunderstood in the U.S. I'm sure that you have heard reports of Venezuela becoming an authoritarian state where we don't allow dissent and civil rights are ignored. But what happened is that it is exactly the opposite. We envision a Venezuela in which people are not merely represented, but instead they are active participants in identifying problems and proposing solutions. There have been a discussion, for example, that because we have been asking people to respect that our president is a democratically elected president. But now some people are saying it's not enough that you are elected democratically, it's that you have to govern democratically. And we agree. But we have to debate what does it mean to govern a country democratically. According to an 18 countries survey recently conducted by Latino Barometro, a well-respected and independent polling firm based in Chile, Venezuelans rank their country as one of the most democratic in all of Latin America. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being non-democratic and 10 being totally democratic, Venezuelans ranked their country at 7.6, the highest rating in the region, where the average stood at 5.5. 56% of all Venezuela also identifies themselves as rather satisfied or very satisfied with their democracy, behind only Uruguay and above the regional average of 31%. More than that, Venezuela ranked fourth in the region in terms of familiarity with their constitution, second in public confidence on the expenditures of taxes, and third in the fight against corruption. So, democracy in Venezuela is more vibrant than ever. Sometimes the Venezuelan people themselves proudly express. And in the case of Venezuela, we had a process of what we call a participatory democracy, including that it doesn't mean that we are going to sacrifice representative democracy, but what we are saying is the representative democracy is not enough. Actually, in this country, you have direct democracy at local level, for example. I think in some state also. Well, President Chavez, when we wrote the Constitution, we established the figure of referenda. So all elected leaders are subject to go to a popular referendum. Our president went through a process of referendum, and he was ratified by the overwhelming majority of Venezuelans. By the way, I think it's the first case in the continent for sure, and if we look at the world, probably we will find 1 or 2 examples. But it's not very common that a leader who is accused of being an authoritarian leader promote in a constitution that there should be referendum for all elected leaders. The other thing is, we have to combine democracy with social programs. Our perception is everybody agree that poverty and social exclusion are the 2 main priorities in the hemisphere. But when we see what we are doing, if those 2 problems are recognized as the 2 main problems causing even political instability, injustice, etc., when we see we are not doing enough, we are doing far from enough. And the perception is that in some cases we're not doing anything at all. So from the very beginning, we understood that we cannot be driven by only economic growth, because in some of the countries you have good indexes of economic growth, but you see poverty and social exclusion remaining. And some of the economic policies that have been proposed in Latin America, they have failed. It's like if you are sick and you go through a treatment and the treatment is getting you worse and not better, you better change the treatment or discuss the treatment, bring in other opinions. And this is basically what we have been trying to do, is to put social as a priority. And when we look at the problem of political stability, we think that unless we address right now the problems of poverty and social exclusion, we will have more stability in the future. So what we have been doing is Venezuela is overseeing a massive transfer of resources to the country's poorest, using 3.7 billion of the oil revenue for social programs in 2004 and close to 5 billion this year. Similarly, social spending as a part of GDP has increased to 12% since President Chavez's election. Recently, United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan recognized the success of Venezuelan famed social missions, which will allow the country to meet the UN Millennium Development Goal by 2012, 3 years ahead of schedule. Close to 1.5 million people have learned to read through the Mission Robinson, while many others have received high school degrees through Mission Rivas and the university diplomas through Mission Sucre. Some 18 million Venezuelans have received free health care through Mission Barrio Adentros and basic food at reduced prices through Mission Mercal, which account for 40% of the country's food sales. These missions seek to start paying back the huge social debt Venezuela owes its poorest citizens, while creating a population that is healthy, educated, and endowed with the skills necessary to succeed in a competitive national and international environment. On the topic of the day, relationship with the United States, I would like to start by announcing that tomorrow I will be in Boston to herald the beginning of a revolutionary new project. Starting tomorrow, Venezuela, through its US-based subsidiary, Citgo, will provide poor communities in various cities across the US heating oil at reduced cost. We see this as a gesture of friendship to the American people and our responsibility as a leading global supplier of oil. Extraordinary times require extraordinary measures, those that we are happy to sponsor. It is no secret that relations between the US and Venezuela has been difficult. Many of the differences between the two countries are simply differences of vision, differences in how we see the world and how we seek to solve its problems. Though those differences do not mean that we cannot work together on issues of mutual interest, but they do require that those differences be respected. The principal challenge facing the US in Latin America, in my estimation, is deciding whether their intentions in the regions will be motivated by the principles of equitable democratic development or will be limited by the tired dogma of hegemony and the control of powerful economic interests. The countries of Latin America have the right to determine their own political and economic destiny and to be seen as equal partners in a joint enterprise for the betterment of the region's people. We are not the United States exclusive backyard, much less should be ruled over by policies influenced by the Monroe Doctrine. The issue of relations between the US and Latin America is closely tied to the issue of regional integration. That comes back to the times of Simón Bolívar, and which President Chávez has been promoting since his election. Latin America cannot succeed in the global environment as a collection of neighboring yet fully independent countries. Rather, it must look towards creating a system of regional integration and cooperation that will better allow it to negotiate with other world powers, including the US. Regional integration will go beyond competition, though, and will address complementarity and solidarity. Being an important oil-producing country, Venezuela has negotiated a variety of important agreements that increase regional cooperation and integration on energy issues. Most recent is the creation of the 14 countries Petrocaribe, soon to be followed by Petrosur and Petroamerica. Basically, we understand that if we want fair prices, we also have to understand what is the impact of those prices to the rest of the economies. And from the very beginning, we start saying we have to find ways of cooperating with countries, poor countries, small countries, where prices of oil could be creating a lot of distortions. And this is why we came with the idea, why don't we go and try to finance part of the oil bill to those countries? And we are giving some of those countries, by the way, independent of their political and ideological orientation, the chance to buy oil and products from Venezuela and allow them to finance, according to the prices of the international market, part of the oil bill. And we are giving them, to some of them, 15 years of a period of 15 years with only 1 or 2% of interest to finance part of the oil bill. But we have gone beyond that. And we say, why don't we use that as a tool to promote a different kind of trade and economic cooperation? For example, with Argentina. We are working with Argentina. We need technology from Argentina. We need a lot of things from Argentina. We want to go through joint projects with Argentina. So let's go and do that. So there is a whole set of initiatives and possibilities where we go beyond the classical idea of free trade. We need trade. Everybody needs trade. Now there is a whole debate, even in this country, about fair trade. But the other thing is that we need to use trade to enhance the chances to our people, to empower our people, to give them opportunities. So this is why we are using this new idea of regional integration, trying to use the strengths of everybody in a way of joint cooperation. Will these and other agreements change the balance of hemispheric relations? Of course. Is there anything wrong with that? Of course not. As the countries of Latin America develop into confident and developed democracies, they will naturally seek to broaden their relation with their neighbors and promote initiatives that benefit their people. One of the most important themes Venezuela seeks to address is poverty and social exclusion. We all agree that poverty and social exclusion cause instability and provoke crisis of governability. As I said before, what are we doing to address and to those two big problems? Because most of the time, all too often, our focus on drug trafficking, crime, and terrorism, serious problems, no doubt, have forced a military mindset upon all other challenges. Many of the United States policies in the region have favored guns and soldiers over diplomacy and politics, pushing attention away from serious social problems that pose the most direct threat to our countries. It is imperative that we rethink how we deal with poverty and social exclusion. And I just want, because I would like to open the possibilities for question and for interaction with you. I think the most important, the way of going, it will be that we sit down in a dialogue and we really think and we really see issues, and if we agree or if we don't agree, When you have dialogue first, you will find that most of the problems are not problems. There are ways of solving that. Then you will identify the real problems. And then you have to start managing those problems. Unfortunately, with the role of the media in those days, actually, the perception we have is that what happened in the media, how the media tried to present a problem, then they created problems. And this is why it's so important that we discuss, we have a dialogue, and we put on the table the real issues. Is a real issue that we oppose the free trade agreement that has been promoted, for example, in this country? Yes, there is a radical difference. Well, the best way is to start discussing that difference instead of accusing you of being a destabilizing force because you don't agree with the vision of the other. And again, we cannot move from the hemisphere. You, US people, we Latin Americans, we are going to live here forever. There are all dilemmas. The idea that you will promote a kind of democracy or a kind of social structure the way you have in the US, and trying to impose that vision, we have been going through that dilemma for 200 years. And there have been a lot of problems, elite-oriented democracies, lack of participation, any time that there is popular participation, so people start criminalizing those movements instead of recognizing that probably they are reflecting what people really feel. So I think that if we take into account our principles, our common problems, I always say, with all respect, that the problem is that sometimes it's easier to go back to the Cold War mentality than trying to understand the complexities of the world. And when they have asked me, even distinguished members of Congress from both parties, what is my perception? And again, very respectable, I have said, I think sometimes people don't want to adjust their lens, and they keep looking at the reality with broken lens. It's like when you have myopia. If you don't adjust your lens, if you don't change your lens, you never will see the reality the way reality it is. You might be happy because you say for many people it's easier just to undermine or to criminalize or to accuse somebody of whatever, but at the end you are not really looking at the real problems that we are facing in our countries. On the other hand, I think we should keep maintaining the common areas we are working with. Let me give you just two examples, and then I close. Energy. Venezuela has never participated in any embargo to the US. And we won't do that. We won't do that because we have had historically a sense of responsibility that at the end you are not harming the government, you are harming people. And because it will be criminal and immoral having a source of energy that you are going to deny energy to the people that need that energy. By the way, it's not only that people from the developed world need energy. I think we have to also sit down and understand what happened with countries that they don't have access to energy. Let me give you an example for you to see the inequalities in the world. The 41 poorest countries in the world they consume, they have a domestic consumption of oil exactly as the one we have in Venezuela. So one country, Venezuela, which is a medium-sized country, we consume more than the 41 poorest countries in the world. Are we going to do something? Are we going to deny energy to those countries? This is very important. On the other hand, we have to discuss even the future, because, for example, Venezuela, we want to diversify our markets, as the U.S. want to diversify the source of energy. We want to increase our production. We want also to participate in joint process and projects to increase the refining capacity, which is the real problem in this country. We need to sit down to discuss all those global issues. Because otherwise, there will be people saying that if we think that we have to go also for the Chinese market, for example, we don't want that is going to be perceived as a threat, that we are, threatening the U.S. because we are looking for another customer. And this is why those issues of energy should be discussed, taking into account not only the needs of the producers, fair price, investment, or the need of the consumers, access to energy at the reasonable prices, but we have also to consider what happened with the access of energy of the countries which are not producers, OPEC producers, or non-OPEC producers, or big consumers in the developed world. Unless we do that, we are creating a lot of inequalities. So this is something which is very important, and we can keep that at a very professional and technical level and trying to raise the strategic issues, not only of our own interests, but the interests of the world. So this is one very important issue. The other issue, and I want just to refer to you, we have had a lot of good relationship with some members of Congress. And recently, we had a visit to Venezuela of a very distinguished Republican senator, Senator Arlen Specter. He went to Venezuela. He was very much concerned with the drug trafficking. We have had some differences with the U.S. Basically, we say to the U.S., we have been doing a good job. There is still a problem, but we are working very hard. And we want to cooperate, but we cannot allow the U.S. to work in Venezuela independent and with autonomy of the Venezuelan legislation and authorities. So we said to them, well, let's go and review the agreement we have between the two countries. There was then the scandal of the press, whatever, and all these people trying to accuse us, whatever. Well, Mr. Specter went to Venezuela, and he said, let's sit down. He went and talked to the foreign ministry. He raised the problem. We gave him the information, and then he said, I want to meet President Chavez, and he went and met President Chavez. And President Chavez had a meeting in his office with Senator Specter, or foreign ministry, justice ministry, and even he invited the U.S. ambassador. So after that meeting, the U.S. ambassador and our Minister of Justice, they have been working together. We have sent a proposal to the U.S. government, and they are now reviewing that. I think it's important because even with some lack of communication between the two governments, we have people, and by the way, this is a very distinguished member of the Senate, is a Republican, working for common causes. So those are some ideas that and that give me hope. Just to close, then, we are members of the same part of the world. we have to understand that we have to respect each other. And respect means that we have to understand our own process. We cannot think that other countries are going to behave exactly the same way you want. You have to allow people the chances to figure it out, even dream his own development. There is a whole set of new social movements, as there is a whole set of new international issues. The access to information, the gender issues. People want to have to solve their problems in their lifetime. And this idea that, you know, people were condemned to live in poverty and exclusion. So those are realities. And we have to understand that this is part of the new world. So why don't we try to sit down? Why don't we try to understand what is going on in our countries? And respectable, why don't we try to adjust our lens and try to see the reality as it is, and not trying to undermine or disqualify processes that are going on in our countries. Thank you very much.
Do you put any taxes or constraints upon excessive salaries and bonuses in the course of the major policy which you mentioned, and that is distributing oil revenues to the needy?
For a country, for a producing country like Venezuela, the first priority for us was to review the fiscal contribution of the oil industry to the rest of the economy. Because basically the more liberal policies, they were favoring investment in spite of trying to privilege the actual fiscal revenue that the government has as the owner of the natural resources. So what we did first was to increase the government take on the oil revenues. And this is, by the way, part of the whole discussion in Latin America today. What is the role of the natural resources? And this is why many people in the countries are trying to fight for a fair share on the benefits of the natural resources exploitation by private or public companies. So we did that. That was our first target, and we increased royalties up to 30% for our national oil company, but also for the foreign oil companies working in Venezuela. Second, and this is of course huge in relation to the other ways of doing that. Secondly, we cannot do anything about foreign companies working in our country because they do pay their people according to their own rules. And in the case of our national company, what we have done is trying to incorporate a lot of programs. So instead of a company only giving you the fiscal revenue, they have to participate in all the social and economic programs of the country. For example, open up the company to small and medium-sized Venezuelan companies to participate in all the process of the company. There is a good example regarding, for example, IT, information technology, because what happened in the world is that there is a huge concentration. If you go, for example, for service companies, for the US, for the oil business, there are probably 4 or 5 corporations, worldwide corporations, that they get probably 85% of the energy or service contract. So we start looking at that situation and telling those companies, because some of them are very important technologically speaking, you have to open the participation for small and medium-sized companies in the country. For example, in all what is called the supply chain of the oil process, which is huge, promoting cooperative, promoting new ways of people organizing in productive activities and participating in the oil company. In Venezuela, it's incredible because some people said that we have destroyed the company. And by the way, the only way that the U.S. suffered stoppage of oil and products coming to the U.S. were during the process, the political process in Venezuela that led that some members at that time of the oil company, they decided for political reasons to stop the company. So we did all we could, and we have been very successful in reestablishing the oil company, and of course the supplies to the U.S. But what is important is now people feel that the oil company belongs to them, that they have chances of working. For example, one of the missions, social missions, is called RIVAS. It's a mission oriented to allow people that never end up high school to finish high school. And we had problems with the education minister because we didn't have the expertise, the resources. So the oil company, our oil company, became the coordinator with many other agencies of that program that is allowing. We have 195,000 people that are going to graduate the 2nd of December. And this is a job has been coordinated by the oil company, because those people, they have not only the resources, but the management skill, the institution skills, etc. So it's a way of using, because Venezuela before was a divided country. On the one hand, you have a modern society, and on the other hand, you have a traditional, a very poor society. And now what we are trying to do is trying to approach those two societies.
What's the government plan for dealing with a non-petroleum-based economy in Venezuela?
Let me tell you the perception. Our perception is that Venezuela is not going to face that problem for the next 100 years. So when you see the oil situation in the world, what you see is most of the oil-producing countries are going to become consumers, net consumers. In the OPEC country, we have the example of Indonesia, for example. And at the end, you will have probably 6 or 7 major players in the OPEC. The thing is how to use the energy resources you have for a much more, for a different process of development. And that has 2 dimensions, the internal dimension and the international dimension. The internal dimension is we are putting together, and that has been a dream, and that has been an idea of many good Venezuelans all over the years. But unfortunately, we start losing control in Venezuela. We started losing control over our national company 20 years ago. Now we have recovered the control over the national company, because before it was on the hands of people that they have their own plan. And the idea is, first, how to use oil to promote an industrial base. Second, instead of selling only crude, how we go through a process of downstream development. I'll give you an example. Citgo Corporation is 100% owned by Venezuela. 16% of the products of the refineries of the Citgo go to the industry. In Venezuela, we have a huge refining complex, and only 1% of the products go to other industries. Because in Venezuela, we basically produce crude, gasoline, and oil, and aceites, how to say that? A specific type of oil. So how we go from being a country that only extract and produce products and oil and gasoline, how we go and try to develop a whole industrial base. In the case of the plastic industry, for example, there is a lot to be done. On the other hand, how we promote also national companies to participate in the oil upstream business. And by the way, this is good for you to know, for the first time under President Chavez's government, we have developed a national sector of private-owned operators in Venezuela. Because we consider that it's good, allowing Venezuela to participate, and on the other hand, it's also a way of contracting or finding a balance with our own national company. Because when you have a company, a national company, which is a monopoly, there is a problem always with the monopolies. It doesn't mean that because of that we are going to sell our oil industry. Because if we sell our oil industry, this is the center of our future, the possibilities for the future. Then, how we do to balance the oil and the non-oil sector, particularly agriculture and other sectors of society. And this is basically what we are trying to connect all the capabilities, not only the money, but capabilities, new businesses, trying to promote an integration between the oil sector and the non-oil sector. Because at the end, we have to find a balance. This is nationally. Internationally, how we see it. We don't see that there is any chance for Venezuela alone, although we have those natural resources, to become a developed economy in the next 30 years, unless we go through a process of economic, political, and social integration with the hemisphere. So this is why Venezuela is talking to South America and saying to South America, why don't we go through a process of development? We can use the energy that Venezuela could provide you to create a huge economic area in Latin America, in South America, and try to compensate each other. Try to take advantage of, instead of just competing among ourselves, or competing ourselves for the access to the markets, why don't we try to create, as you have done in this country, as Europe did in the past, to create a regional entity, economic, social, and political, and then the resources of Venezuela will play a key role for a much more broader economic sphere, which is the whole of South America.
How important in terms of GNP is the drug traffic to Venezuela? And secondly, are you going after, if you are at all, the large distributors as opposed to the small distributors? And in any case, what's your solution to the drug problem?
In the case of Venezuela, Venezuela is basically a country of transit rather than a producer government. But of course we are part of the Andean region, and as you know, we have a huge border with Colombia, which is a country where you all know the importance of that problem, and of course the rest of the Andean countries. So Venezuela is basically a country of transit. Yesterday we got 2.2 tons of cocaine yesterday, that by the way we're going to take out of the country in a US plane. I mean, no government, of course. I mean, I'm saying with the tail number, of the planes was a November plane. And it's difficult, it's really difficult because it's a huge country also, Venezuela. And We have been working hard on that, and this is why we cooperate a lot with the Netherlands, because you know the importance also of the island in the Caribbean for that problem. With Spain, because from Venezuela there is a lot of drug going to Spain, okay? Also to France, to the European countries. And this is why it's so important for us to keep cooperating with the US. And this is why we have proposed a new draft for the US to cooperate with us, or to have joint cooperation on that. The other problem is regarding drugs. There is always the issue, what is the final consumers? And the problem is that as far as you have people with money to pay, you basically feel, when you believe in free trade and profit, that there will be always somebody producing that to be sold in the market. And in our country, drug is very much related to crime. And the problem we have there is that young kids are using very, very strong and chemicals and things like that that create a lot of problems. So for us, drugs is very much linked with poverty and exclusion and, you know, people in the poor areas. So on the one hand, we have to have a comprehensive approach, including not only the offer, but also the demand of drugs. And in our countries, we have, in some areas, this is not the case of Venezuela, but in other countries, there is a culture of growing. And it has a lot of implications economically, because those people have been doing that for years and years. So the whole thing of how you train them to go to other type of crops and things like that. So it's a complex process. And we are now working a lot, of course we should do more, in the money laundering, because it's so difficult, all this huge amount of money. You just have to see the TV in this country or the movies, and then you have one of 10 thrillers, or 20 or 30% of the thrillers are related to people that are in a way involved with the traffic, the drug trafficking. But again, it's a complex process. We, as a country of transit, we have to be ready to handle that and to contract that problem. It's not a significant part of the GDP in terms of that we don't produce them massively, but of course it distorted in many ways society, because the amount of money that goes through even this transit process in the country. It's a health issue also. We cannot understand that it's only a problem of security or money. It's also a health problem. So I think that has been the approach also of the United Nations for many years. So I think we have to have very complex approach for this problem.
Would you comment on the recent diplomatic crisis between Venezuela and Mexico?
Our two governments have spoken. Our two presidents have spoken. And all I could say you here that we really expect that it doesn't go beyond that. And we have to be open for any possibility. There was a very good set of events in Mexico and in Venezuela where the Mexican people on the street and the Venezuelan people massively in the street were saying, we have to be together. So let's hope that the common interest and the willingness of our people will help to solve that diplomatic impasse.
The gentleman remarked about, he quoted a number of the comments by the president of your country, including calling this country and our president a terrorist and madman and things of that ilk. The question was, do you believe that that's constructive to a diplomatic dialogue?
Let me tell you something. When I was, because this is, of course, a question that some people ask, and I was collecting all in this country, the administration have been saying about us. And I have two books. We have been accused of giving money to Al-Qaeda, hosting terrorists in the Margarita Island, which is a resort. I don't know how can you hide somebody there, of being a threat of destabilizing the hemisphere, hosting the FARC guerrilla members in Venezuela, expropriating everybody, closing all the media. And there was a hearing in Congress recently, and somebody came with that idea, and there was a member of Congress that showed them 3 articles in the newspapers of Venezuela of that day that were much more hostile than anything you can get here. So you have to understand that, and of course, I'm the representative of the president. I don't have any comments to do about what he said. But I just want to put you, because this is not my, he said, he has a perception and he has to answer anything. What I'm saying to you is, because if you put it in this way, you are getting the whole thing out of context. And of course, I mean, sometimes my job is trying to promote common interests, but, and I haven't said anything in my talk, as you see, about the hostility. And it has been a real hostility. Exim Bank went out of Venezuela. We have been accused of human trafficking with no reason. We have been accused and decertified because of drugs. They have accused us of being expropriating companies without reason. There are planes that we have in the border that protect the border with Colombia, and all the spare parts are kept because we don't give the permits, export permits in the border. So when you see what we have been living here, you will have context. Anyway, this is, as I said, I'm optimistic. Of course, this is not a member of the administration, although some people say that is a person that has been linked with the administration. I don't know if you remember recently that we have a reverend called Pat Robertson asking for the assassination of President Bush, of President Chavez. Yeah, but what I'm saying to you is you have private citizens, people that have been in government, people that belongs to political parties in this country. I can give you, for your illustration, 2 whole volumes of what we have been accused in this country. And we have been reacting. And of course, at the end, there are different ways of reacting, particularly when you are reacting to the most powerful country in the world.
Mr. Ambassador, you're extraordinarily generous with your time. We do have to adhere, however, to our norm of ending close to 10 minutes after 7. Thanks you very, very much.